It's strange to think about it now, but there was a time before people understood how the human body worked, and because of that, there were some pretty bizarre medical treatments floating around. And there was no quack treatment more liberally applied than the standard go-to of bloodletting. Allow me to explain. Bloodletting is exactly what it sounds like, the removal of blood, sometimes with extreme precision and sometimes with reckless abandon. Now that might sound like a torture technique, but in most cases it was intended to be just the opposite. Bloodletting was supposed to improve a person's health. It was common to see it prescribed for extremely diverse ailments, from pneumonia to vertigo to sunstroke and everything in between. It's easy to dismiss this archaic procedure as completely illogical, and in most cases it was, but according to the medical models at the time, it made perfect sense. The story begins, as many do, in the past. Bloodletting made important appearances in both ancient Greek and ancient Chinese culture. Interestingly, both the Western and Eastern versions of bloodletting hinged on the same misunderstanding of human biology, that something other than blood was contained in the circulation system's vessels. In the East, that something was chi, and in the West, it was pneuma, but both of these terms meant basically the same thing: life force. Life force was the concept of your soul itself reaching out through your bloodstream to keep your body parts alive. According to the beliefs at the time, it did this by mixing air with the blood in your vessels, which was then cooked to a certain temperature. This abstraction is actually very close to reality. Your blood carries oxygen and heat around your body to keep you alive. What wasn't accurate, however, was the role the ancients thought this process played in disease. The ancients were overly concerned with blockages and balances of life force. In ancient Eastern medicine, this blocked chi was thought to cause disease. The idea was that a malady, in at least some writings referred to as an evil spirit, gains entrance into the body through the skin or hair, and then lodges in a blood vessel, blocking both chi and blood. According to an ancient Chinese medical writing from around 300 BCE called The Plain Questions, if it remains there and is not expelled, it then spreads and enters into the organs. In order to unblock the chi, practitioners used flint or stone needles to draw blood and let the spirit out. Sound familiar? That's right, acupuncture started out as bloodletting. It was only over time as the needles got thinner and the philosophy of chi continued to evolve that the bleeding part was eliminated. Meanwhile, in the West, at roughly the same time was the idea of plethora, or an overabundance of blood that blocked the flow of pneuma. The theory of plethora was advocated by a guy named Erasistratus, who believed that the proper treatment was starvation. It was believed at the time that food and drink were turned directly into blood, and so by eating less, the plethora would recede. However, some of his colleagues didn't really listen to him, and instead turned to bloodletting as an alternative, believing it to be faster than fasting. The other reason that ancient physicians thought it was a good idea to open up arteries was because they were trying to restore balance. In the East, the balance was thought to be between yin and yang, and in the West, it was a complicated balance of four humors. The four humors was an ancient idea that there were four main elements in nature: air, fire, water, and earth. And around the 4th century BCE, this theory was extended to the human body by a guy named Hippocrates, often referred to as the father of Western medicine. He theorized that these four elements existed within the human body as four different fluids: blood, yellow bile, phlegm, and black bile. In this model, blood was linked to air, representing life force. Fast forward around 500 years and we meet a character named Galen, who was the most important person on Earth. Or so he would have you believe. Galen loved to write. He loved it so much that he never formed any real relationships with anyone in order to focus on his writings. There was only one person Galen really liked, and that was Hippocrates. Galen wrote reviews of Hippocrates' bookses that were longer than the bookses themselves. In fact, a lot of what we know about Hippocrates, we know because of what Galen wrote. Some of what he wrote has been lost, but what remains is enough to fill 22 thick volumes, including 3 books on bloodletting. For around 1300 years, these writings would reign above all others as the leading medical authority. But it turns out, Galen got a lot of things wrong. Part of the problem was that it was a major taboo to dissect the corpses of people during Galen's lifetime, and so he mostly used animals as proxies in order to draw conclusions about the human body. His anatomical models of humans contained animal parts that aren't actually present in our bodies. More errors were due to a lack of scientific tools that just weren't available to him at the time. Among other things, Galen believed that muscles were the support network of tendons and not the other way around, and that babies were conceived due to a mixture of semen and menstrual blood. But perhaps his biggest folly was in his model of the circulation system. According to Galen, first, food in the belly was cooked and turned into blood in the liver, where it was mixed with equal parts of the other three humors. From there, some of it traveled to the heart, where it was mixed with air and something called innate heat, which was literally just body heat, but with a supernatural twist. From there, the mixture was fed to internal organs to help them grow. The exhaust from this combustion system exited the body through pores in the skin as a smoky residue. Galen believed that if the blood was overcooked, it would contain too much yellow bile, and if it was undercooked, it would contain too much phlegm. And everybody knows only blood containing balanced levels of bile and phlegm is the most nutritious. Galen believed that this badly mixed blood was causing illness. For example, pneumonia was caused by too much phlegm, and fever and sunstroke were caused by too much yellow bile. This bad blood theory was called dyscrasia, which is an appropriate name because dis was crazy, yeah? And what did he recommend for a cure? Bloodletting! Galen brought his ideas to the city of Rome around 160 CE, and he was met with disagreement. The people there were still following the Erasistratus school of thought, that bloodletting was a last resort method. But Galen argued for bloodletting as a routine therapy so convincingly that by the next time he came to Rome, the physicians there were now enthusiastic phlebotomists, bleeding all and sundry with scant concern for whether it was appropriate or not. So Galen again argued with them, this time advising restraint of the practice. These theories about how the human body worked seem ridiculous now, but it's important to understand that being a physician was a very different thing back then. Before the first accurate anatomy books written by Vesalius hit the shelves in 1543, doctors were lucky to know anything at all about body structure because people rarely wrote it down. Preference was given to religious and transactional writing. According to Vivian Nutton's book called Ancient Medicine, most doctors may have owned at best a few brief handbooks or digests of earlier doctrines to supplement what they had learned from word of mouth or simply by watching others as they operated or expounded in theaters or public spaces. These training periods were frequently extremely short by the standards of doctor training today, sometimes lasting 6 months or less. We have records of deceased doctors from Rome that were only 17 years old when they passed away. These days, if a 17-year-old kid tried to pass himself off as a doctor, he'd at least be caught within a month, right? I guess not. So there you have it. People weren't just cutting each other open all willy-nilly for the heck of it. They were doing so because prominent philosophers and physicians insisted that they do so. And that's the end of the story. Except, it isn't. Bloodletting continued well into the 19th century, and its journey to get there will shock you. Tune in next time for the history of bloodletting.